Hello, everybody. Let me adjust my glasses a little bit. I don't want to look like Chuck Schumer.
Hello,
Like,
everybody.
let me adjust my glasses a little bit. Okay, good evening. Thank you all for arriving promptly. That's very good. Hey, Dale. And hey, Bonnie. Dale wants to know how you're holding up through the quarantine. And Dolores says, hi, all. Dale says, yo. Cora says, hello. Well, I hope everybody's feeling well tonight. And I hope you're all holding up well, as Dale says. Yeah, Bonnie and I are great thus far. We've been spending a lot of time at home, of course, because that's what you got to do. And we've been contemplating our situation. When I mean our situation, I don't mean as in me, I mean as in us. Remember, not me, us, right? So I've been contemplating us. As you know, I've been rather dissatisfied with the so-called stimulus bill that was just passed by Congress, following which, okay, it adjourned for most of the month, okay, of April. No doubt thinking that, well, it's done its work. We've given people a little pittance. We set things up for big business, so it'll be fine. But in just a couple of days, we've been learning the money isn't getting there. First of all, it was not enough anyway for the long term, but it's not really getting there. And we've all got to admit that. We have to recognize that, with the possibility that some people may not even get a check for 5 months. That is really ridiculous. Hi, Russell. Hi, Kay. And hi, Rob. Great to see you all. Hi, Barbara. Great to see you too. So, we can all see that, and we can see the government was not set up through the old methods to get money quickly to a collapsing economy and to a loss of capability to do the basic things like pay mortgages, pay rent, pay our utilities, and pay other necessities of life. And meanwhile, over the last 2 weeks, 10 million people have lost their jobs and have to be taken care of, okay, right away. Now, they should be able to be taken care of actually pretty much from day one, but the unemployment system is antiquated. And we've never fixed it up because neither the Democrats nor the Republicans have cared to do so. And so there's no money easily flowing through it. In fact, what we've been doing in recent years, of course, is closing unemployment offices, closing Social Security offices, closing service offices for people in this country. And Tricia Broderick says we Americans should be getting monthly payments and Medicare for all and put all mortgages, rent on hold. We're going to discuss that. We're going to deal with that here tonight. But what I want to start with tonight, and by the way, I want to mention the topic for tonight once more is Congress must come back. The economy must be saved. Well, why must that be so? Well, the first reason is given by Umair Haque, okay, on Medium, in a post that's titled America is Committing Economic Suicide. And his subtitle is The American Economy is About to Die from Coronavirus Because Nobody Saved It. Certainly not the combination of Donald Trump and Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell. No, none of them have saved it. They haven't saved us from the impact of the coronavirus, and they haven't saved us from the effects of the coronavirus on the economy. Let me share the screen here. It'll be just a second. So you should be seeing this nice little chart on unemployment. See that big peak right at the start of the chart? That's in 2010. You can see that. And then since 2010, unemployment has been going down, 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 down. Okay, or new unemployment claims, I should say, have been going down, 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 down. And then suddenly you see 2 weeks ago a spike. And then you see a huge spike. And these are unemployment claims for the first 2 weeks in March. And they don't show that the unemployment claims skyrocketed to 7 million last week. Because what's shown in this graph is the figures for the first 2 weeks of March. But not through the last 2 weeks, okay, of March. And Hague says, you're watching the economy begin to die. That, my friends, is what economic devastation looks like. It says that unemployment claims skyrocketed to 7 million last week. That's a number so high, so fast, there's no parallel in all of recorded history, even remotely. That's very true. Not even in the Depression of the 30s. The American economy is undergoing the largest shock in its history. It's a shock faster, bigger, and more devastating than any war, which is one of many reasons the war metaphor is inadequate. We have literally never experienced such a thing before. And Umair asks, why is the American being left to die? Unquote. Because not nearly enough is being done about it. This shock is unprecedented in history, and the response needed to be too. Instead, Congress and the Prez passed a stimulus bill that's far short of the mark. How much so? In what precise ways? Let's think about it together. The first reason the economy is dying is that the stimulus is inadequate because it's simply far too little. We're going to do a little math together. I wish people would say arithmetic together when they mean arithmetic and not math. But he says We're going to do a little math together. Don't get scared. It's math any grade schooler can handle. It's arithmetic any grade schooler can handle. How large is the U.S. economy? It's about 20 trillion per year. I believe it's at 21.5 trillion now, but okay. Of that, about 99% of the number of firms are small businesses. How large is the portion of the stimulus outlined to support businesses, especially small ones? He says 500 billion. Are you seeing a problem here yet? You should. That's about 2.5% of the economy over a year, which means this. Well, that 500 billion, I don't think he's counting the 500 billion that was going to large businesses. There's 350 billion that's going to small businesses. But his general point is quite correct. Are you seeing a problem here yet? You should. That's just about 2.5% of the economy over a year, which means this. The portion of the stimulus meant to support business is enough to keep the economy going for, wait for it, just 1 week. Sure, we can adjust those numbers up and down. If I assume the 80% of the economy is business, not 100%, the stimulus is enough to keep the economy going for 2 weeks. You see the problem, perhaps. Think about that for a second. Just 1 week of support amidst the greatest crisis since the last World War. What the? ? He's a gentleman, you can tell, because he didn't want to say WTF. This shock is historic precisely because it's going to cause the economy to shut down, as in waves of businesses to literally shut their doors, as people stay at home for far, far longer than a week. It's already been a week. It's going to be months until any semblance of normality is resumed. But by then it will be too late because this stimulus only supports the economy for a week. Most of it will be dead. Yes, really. That brings me to the second reason the stimulus is short of the mark. This stimulus isn't quick, large, or simple enough to buoy confidence. So people are beginning to panic. And I thought this was a great point of this particular piece, bringing up panic. Even if I want to get what little support is being offered, say as a small business owner, how do I begin? Where do I turn? Well, it so happened that the Bank of America was ready to do business on the basis of the SBA's newly capacity to do business starting at 9 a.m. Just yesterday, if I recall. But, however, it would only do business for people who both had a loan with them and who had a checking account with them. People or businesses, small businesses. So you had to have both. If you had a loan with them, that wasn't enough. If people borrow in one place and check somewhere else, they wouldn't qualify for Bank of America even if they did one of those things, okay, with Bank of America. None of the other banks were ready to go. So Umair says, even I myself can scarcely figure out the answer, and I've pored over the various documents. It's a tangle of red tape. It's a bureaucratic mess. That might not sound like a big deal, but it is. Why? Keynes pointed out about a century ago that the key to staving off depressions is confidence. If I believe that things will be okay, and you do too, then maybe we won't hoard our money and lay off our employees and so forth, and the vicious spiral of depression will not result. But I can't figure out how to assess even what little support there is. Then I will lose confidence fast. The vicious cycle will set in all the sooner. And he might have added, it's especially going to set in when people are advised to stay home and not go into their place of business, but only do what they can from home. So many businesses, specifically retail businesses, can't do much that way. They can't do much that way. And Haidt goes on, that is precisely what we see happening. Why have 10 million people filed for unemployment in just 2 weeks? because there's not enough support to keep the economy going, and because what little there is isn't producing a feeling of confidence. Well, that's part of the reason. Okay, another part of the reason is there are many millions of people who've just had their small businesses pretty much shut down because their retail businesses, their restaurant businesses, their personal services businesses, they involve seeing people walking in the door, and people don't want to walk in the door because they don't want to take a chance. Instead, because it's a maze and a mess, says Haig, people are fast losing confidence in institutions and systems. That much is true. Employers are laying people off even if they don't have to because they can't figure out how not to have to. Meanwhile, the media is touting a $1,200 check for every American. The truth is very different. That $1,200 has all kinds of tests attached to it. If you make this much as a single person, that much as a married couple, and so on, it's true that 90% of people will see something, but most people won't see nearly enough. Let's do the same calculation we did for businesses for people. The economy is 20 trillion, 21.5 trillion again. The U.S. has 127, or it was until it shut down. A nice economy you had there. The U.S. has 127 million households, give or take. Divided equally, that produces income per household of about 150K. But of course, Americans aren't nearly that rich. Why? Because it's not divided equally, right? The median income is only about 60K, because the rich skim a full half of the economy right off the top. 60K is about $1,100 per week. That means the much vaunted stimulus check equals about just a week's worth of the average person's income. Yep. Do you see the weird parallel here? The stimulus is so small, it supports businesses for just 1 week. And exactly the same is true for people. It supports the average person for just 1 week, too. Just 1 week. It's already been more than a week. That brings me to the third reason this stimulus is inadequate. What good is it supporting people and businesses for 1 week with all kinds of strings attached when the crisis will last for months? Now, remember, Nancy Pelosi, she specializes in Band-Aids. Remember the Affordable Care Act of 2010. What was the Affordable Care Act? It was a Band-Aid. A Band-Aid on the healthcare crisis. Even after it was all over, taking all the political things that happened into account, we had more than 30 million people without health insurance. Of course, the estimates are very different here. My own estimates were by the time Trump finished with the Affordable Care Act, up to just a few months ago, I think there were at least 33 to 34 million people that didn't have insurance. Okay, which was down from the 45 million we started out with in 2005. But after all, the economy had gotten far larger since then, another 30 million people. And so we hardly handled any part of the problem. There were 45 million uninsured then, and there are 33 million now. The ratio of fatalities to lack of insured was 1/786, which meant there was something like 37 to 38,000 fatalities per year resulting from people being uninsured. That was the death toll every year. That money won't be paid out for several more weeks. Okay, says Omer. Perhaps months in many cases. And the conditions attached to it make it a sum that's almost meaningless for many people. Are you seeing the problem again? Timing and conditionality. What absurdly little support there is will arrive. Far, far too late. Too late for what? Not just too late to pay the bills. We can all see that coming. Too late to prevent panic, which is the key to averting any depression. On the other hand, we don't get panic if people have the money they need or know they're going to have the money they need to pay their bills. And who knows how to get it all, says Umair. How much will you get? Whether or not you'll need to hire a lawyer to see any funds at all, who to even apply to, because the design of this stimulus is so obscure, keeping everyone in the dark, there's no real feeling of reassurance or confidence gently lifting up the economy. Hence, people are beginning to panic. That is why 10 million have filed for unemployment in the last 2 weeks alone. Yeah, they want to get their money. They want to get the unemployment insurance funds flowing as quickly as possible because they didn't know how to get that $1,200, that extra $1,200. They still don't quite know whether it's coming to them or not. Who really knows if it is? They have to check with the IRS to see if the IRS has their information or had it when the bill was passed. Otherwise, they're going to have to wait. Now let's think of unbelievably destructive that really is. Think of how unbelievably destructive that really is. His text is missing the word how. How much is 10 million people anyways? The U.S. labor force is about 164 million people. 10 million is already 6% of it. That might not sound like a lot, but it is. It's about 3% a week. If that trend continues, it'll be 12% in a month, 24% in 2 months. That's a quarter of the economy filing for unemployment in a matter of weeks. That's 50% in 4 months. How long do you think coronavirus will last? 2 months? 3 months? 4? Bang! Umair says, coronavirus is an extinction-level event for modern economies. That's why all this, my friends, is an event the likes of which the modern world has never really seen before. Not even in war, natural calamity, or financial crisis. And the idiot in the White House is still pushing sanctions on Iran and on Venezuela. Still insisting on that. Still talking war. Like we need war, like we need a hole in the head. Not even in war, natural calamity, or financial crisis, says Umair. Because when a society reaches even about 25% or so of sudden, irreversible, long-term, hardcore unemployment, the economy is more or less finished. It cannot recover for generations. That number means that huge numbers of businesses are shuttered. He may be exaggerating about the generations part of it. Maybe. It could recover in a relatively brief time if you do the right things, but it still might take years, even if you do the right things. If we end up with 50% unemployment, that kind of crash of the economy, that number means that huge numbers of businesses are shuttered, jobs are destroyed, never to come back, incomes vanish, savings gone, homes foreclosed on. It is the end of families, relationships, stability, hope. It is usually the end of democracy, too, as people turn to a strong man in their rage and discontent and despair. Economic ruin is the end of a gentle, modern, wise culture, society, and politics. In this way, the root of all ruin. Umar's got a great turn of the phrase from time to time. All that collapse is now very much in America's near future. Not next year, but this summer, because the response to coronavirus has been profoundly inadequate. You can see it in everyday life. Doctors fashioning masks from pizza boxes. The dying sharing ventilators. All this reflects the simple fact the American government didn't do nearly enough about the greatest economic shock in modern history. It barely did anything at all. Shades of Hubert Heaver. In the end, when they write the books, I'm confident they'll say this. The American government supported people in business for 1 week, just 1 week, in the middle of an epic, historic crisis, which was to last for months. As a result, the economy seized up and died, like a coronavirus patient who couldn't breathe anymore but didn't have a ventilator either. But that was needless, because money at this scale is just a social fiction. And then he goes on but to point out that we can find the money, okay, if we want to. The government doesn't owe the money to anybody except to itself. It's only borrowed from itself, and therefore it can cancel a debt too. No, he says, there won't be inflation. What there will be is massive deflation if none of the above happens. All those millions filing for unemployment, that means wages fall massively and prices follow too. Think of it like filling a hole. Coronavirus has shredded a massive gaping hole in the heart of the economy. Either the government fills it, borrowing thread, buying needles, and employing people to stitch and sew, or like any hole in a fabric, or by the way, do anything else that needs done, it grows, one thread fraying at a time, leading to the next. And of course, whenever we employ the people to protect their lives and the lives of others, we're going to have to see that they have the safety equipment, that they have the PPE. Everybody needs PPE when they're in constant contact with everybody else. The government filling the hole is not bad economics or irresponsible. It's the only sensible thing to do. When the fabric of the economy is whole again, then the debt of buying all that new thread is immediately revealed to be imaginary. If we hadn't done it, we wouldn't have had an economy at all. The resources we borrowed from ourselves tomorrow for use today were therefore necessary, life-saving, critical investments. Without them, we wouldn't have had it tomorrow at all. And then he says, so money in an event like this is a social fiction. It is a public good whose use we must immediately and radically and dramatically expand and maximize, so that massive, life-saving, social-scale investment can happen immediately. But we Americans don't quite understand that. Capitalism has convinced us, that debt is as real as the violence of a gun. But it isn't. Debt, credit, money, and finance, these are all just social constructions. There are times when societies need to go into massive debt, quote unquote, which really means invest massively so that everyone and everything, including life as they know it, can survive. That simply means they need to allow their mechanism of collective action, the government, to borrow artificially limited resources from itself tomorrow for everyone today, or else we don't have much of a tomorrow. This is one of those moments, or as life as we know it implodes. Oh, will Americans get that, though, before it's too late? He asks, and then answers, I'll see you on the breadlines, brother. Well, of course, what he's missing, perhaps, is that since it's a social construction, and since the government can create the money the government doesn't need to go into debt to anyone else, doesn't need to borrow, quote unquote, any money from anyone else. It can simply create new money without at the same time selling any debt instruments at all. And we'll talk about that, okay, in a little while. But the point is, if we do that, and if we do that in the amount that is necessary for the purposes that are necessary and that are appropriate in this particular crisis, then we won't see Umer Haik on the breadlines, and he won't see us on the breadlines, because none of us are going to be on the breadlines. That is the truth. So, why is it the truth? Well, one of the reasons is Bernie Sanders' priorities for the next coronavirus relief package, which Congress needs to get back to D.C. to immediately enact. There should be a minimum of talking and powwowing unless there's a determination to go even bigger than what is conceived of here. So let's go through it. Number one, addressing the employment crisis and providing immediate financial relief. And Bernie mentions the 10 million people who have lost their jobs, more than in the Wall Street crash of 2008. And that was only in 2 weeks. And this is a third week, and we're on Friday of the third week. And next Wednesday, we may find out that even more people lost their jobs during this week. We're going to have to wait and see to find out. But I wouldn't be surprised to find that 8 million or 9 million or 10 million file for unemployment claims during this week. There is little doubt that we are facing an economic crisis, this is I'm reading from Bernie now, that could be even worse than the Great Depression. And he points out the St. Louis Fed has projected that 47 million people may become unemployed by the end of June, with unemployment reaching 32.1%. I brought that out to you last time we were here. We must make sure that every worker in America continues to receive their paycheck during this crisis. And we must provide immediate financial relief to everyone in this country. Then he has bullet points. Keep workers on the payroll is the first one. Just as other countries have, including the UK, Norway, and Denmark, we must make sure every worker in America continues to receive their paycheck during this crisis. And retroactive to the beginning of the crisis is what he's saying. He's saying workers have to be made whole, retroactive. An important precedent for that approach was taken in the recent stimulus package, in which grants were provided to the airlines for the sole purpose of maintaining the paychecks and benefits of some 2 million workers in that industry through September 30th. Then Bernie calls for monthly direct payments of $2,000 for every person in the country. We must provide direct, recurring, monthly payments for every person in the country, regardless of income, tax filing, or immigration status. That means reaching every person in the United States, including the undocumented, the homeless, the unbanked, and young adults excluded from the CARES Act. Next, guarantee paid medical and sick leave to all workers. Anyone who's sick or needs to stay home should be able to stay home during this emergency and receive their paycheck. At a time when half of our people are living paycheck to paycheck and must go to work in order to take care of their family, we don't want to see people going to work who are sick and can spread the coronavirus. This is especially important for hourly workers who may not have sufficient or any paid sick days to avoid coming into work when they are feeling ill. He wants hazard pay for essential and frontline workers, workers on the front lines of this crisis, including those who work in grocery stores, nurses, warehouse workers, hello Amazon workers, paramedics, pharmacy workers, farm workers, food processing workers, truck drivers, postal workers, also delivery drivers and janitors must be provided hazard pay, child care, and safe working conditions. Essential state and city workers, such as sanitation workers and transit workers, will receive hazard pay as well to ensure states and cities have the personnel they need to fight this crisis. Next, guarantee funding parity for the territories, tribes, and for D.C. We must ensure funding parity for all health and economic coronavirus relief programs. Guarantee these programs to everyone in this country, regardless of immigration status. The coronavirus does not differentiate based on immigration status, and our economic and health response must not either. Guaranteeing all residents the assistance they need makes us safer, stronger, and is the morally right thing to do. 2. We must guarantee health care to all. He says, let's be clear, we're facing a catastrophic healthcare crisis before the pandemic, and now that crisis has become much, much worse. Already, he says, 87 million people are uninsured or underinsured. Layoffs will mean tens of millions more will lose their current insurance, which is going to result in countless deaths and bankruptcies. Already, in the last 2 weeks, an estimated 3.5 million people have lost their employer-sponsored insurance. As the pandemic grows, we're seeing more and more reports of people who have delayed treatment due to concerns about cost. In this pandemic, uninsurance will lead to deaths and more COVID-19 transmissions. And next bullet point, use Medicare to cover all healthcare expenses. It must be empowered to pay all of the deductibles, co-payments, and out-of-pocket healthcare expenses for the uninsured and the underinsured. No one in America who is sick, regardless of immigration status, should be afraid to seek the medical treatment they need during this national pandemic. And while you're at it, Bernie, also Medicare must be empowered to pay all of the deductibles, co-payments, and out-of-pocket health care expenses for those who have Medicare now. In other words, it's got to be Medicare for all during this crisis. 3. Use the Defense Production Act to produce the equipment and testing we need. Well, we've heard a lot about that thus far, but Bernie says, unbelievably, in the United States right now, doctors and nurses are unnecessarily putting their lives on the line, treating people suffering from the coronavirus because they lack personal protective equipment, PPEs, like masks, gloves, and surgical gowns. The CDC has directed health professionals to use homemade gear like bandanas or scarves, and some workers at the VA are being told to reuse one surgical mask for a week at a time. HHS estimated that our country needs 3.5 billion masks in response to this crisis. We must protect our frontline healthcare workers and immediately take all measures necessary to manufacture and distribute all the protective equipment, tests, and medical supplies that we need. Bullet point 1. We have to immediately and forcefully use the DPA to direct the production of all the personal protective equipment, ventilators, and other medical supplies we need. He points out that President Trump has used it thousands of times for the military and for enforcement of his immigration policies, yet he has resisted using its power to save lives during the pandemic. That is unacceptable. We must also use this authority to produce antibody tests so we can begin figuring out who has already contracted the virus and has developed some immunity to COVID-19, and he perhaps should have added who it is who can safely go back to work. Safety standards for healthcare workers. OSHA must adopt a strong emergency standard to protect healthcare workers, patients, and the public during this crisis. Of course, OSHA, as part of the Trump administration, has done nothing. I mean, it is doing nothing. It is a dead area of the federal government. And then third bullet point, crack down aggressively on price gougers and hoarders and use any means necessary to secure supplies. Companies and individuals who are using this crisis as an opportunity to turn a profit at the expense of human lives and public safety will be investigated and prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, says Bernie. Item 4, make sure no one goes hungry. Even before this crisis hit, 1 in every 7 kids in America was going hungry, and nearly 5.5 million seniors in our country struggled with hunger. Already in this crisis, we see lines at food banks and growing concern that our most vulnerable communities and those recently employed may struggle to feed their families. We must ensure we are getting food to the most vulnerable in our communities and guarantee no person goes hungry during this crisis. And bullet point 1, increase SNAP the benefits and expand SNAP, and WIC. Okay, so WIC is the Special Nutrition Program for women, infants, and children. And he wants to expand it for infants and children and pregnant mothers. He says, as communities face by record levels of food insecurity, we must increase SNAP benefits, expand eligibility, and expand the WIC program for pregnant mothers, infants, and children. Second, he wants to expand the emergency food program, double funding for the emergency food program to ensure food banks have food to distribute. And he wants to expand Meals on Wheels and school meals programs. Where necessary, we must also develop new approaches to deliver food to vulnerable populations, including door-to-door drop-offs. 5, he wants to provide emergency aid to states and cities. He says, even as state and local employees like police officers, firefighters, and paramedics work on the front lines of this pandemic, states and cities that pay their salaries are facing enormous budgetary pressures. The cost of fighting the coronavirus, combined with a drop in tax revenue for states and for municipalities due to social distancing measures and economic conditions, threaten to leave our states and cities without the resources they need to respond to this pandemic. We must provide federal support for states and cities to weather this crisis. And he talks about direct fiscal aid to states and cities. It says Congress has to provide $600 billion in direct fiscal aid to states and cities to ensure they have the personnel and funding necessary to respond to this crisis. And he says also the Federal Reserve must support states and cities. Federal Reserve must establish programs to direct fiscal support and budgetary relief to states and cities. And number 6, that's the last item in his list, suspend monthly payments. Even before this crisis, half the people in our country were living paycheck to paycheck. In America today, over 18 million families are paying more than 50% of their income on housing. Now, with growing unemployment, families are facing financial ruin if we do not act quickly and boldly. Bullet point 1, suspend monthly expenses like rent, mortgage payments, medical debt, and consumer debt collection for 4 months. We must ensure these payments are not deferred, coming due as soon as the emergency is lifted, but completely suspended. He's saying suspended. So he's going to have to suspend also the interest accumulation. The interest accumulation on medical debt, on consumer debt, on mortgages, all that. Cancel all student loan payments for the duration of this crisis. It says more than 45 million Americans struggle with $1.6 trillion in student debt. We must lift this burden and cancel student debt payments for the duration of this crisis. Why? So the students can stay home. Long term, we must cancel all student debt and make public colleges, universities, trade schools tuition free and debt free. finally place an immediate freeze, that is to say, place a moratorium on evictions, foreclosures, and utility shutoffs. No one should lose their home during this crisis, and everyone must have access to clean water, to electricity, heat, and air conditioning. And we must restore utility services to any customers who have had their utilities shut off. So that is Bernie's plan. It seems to me it's the best plan we have seen thus far. But one area in which it seems to me to be lacking a bit is in how the money is going to get to people fast. And here I'm going to share once again, I'm going to share the plan that was introduced about a week ago by Rashida Tlaib, because her plan has the means in it of getting money to people fast. And her plan is called the Automatic Boost to Communities Act. And of course, he would immediately provide a debit card preloaded with $2,000 to every person in America. Her plan says each card would be recharged with $1,000 monthly until 1 year after the end of the coronavirus. But according to Bernie's proposal, it would be recharged with $2,000 monthly. Bernie hasn't said until 1 year after the end of the coronavirus. Perhaps he would want to add that to his plan. But certainly, his $2,000 a month was for the duration of the coronavirus. The thing to notice here is that it's the U.S. debit cards, preloaded and recharged every month, that can get the money to people quickly. Okay, quickly. Now, his bill should also increase the first payment, okay, the direct payment to people, specifically from $1,200 to $2,000, to equal what's in the Rashida Tlaib Automatic Boost to Communities Act. And she has all the people included in here that Bernie has, okay, in his bill. Her bill says to ensure this program is a universal program and comprehensive as possible, the U.S. Treasury will develop its list of individuals in coordination with the Internal Revenue Service, the Social Security Administration, the Federal Election Commission, and every other relevant federal, state, and local government agency, including state-level departments of motor vehicles, the DMVs. That should produce a pretty close to universal list, and Bernie needs to put something like that in his bill. And when it comes to distributing the money, the prepaid cards would be distributed as U.S. debit cards and would be administered by the U.S. Treasury's Bureau of the Fiscal Service. These prepaid digital cash cards could be used to withdraw physical currency at regular ATMs or FDIC-insured banks or credit unions, or make payments at point-of-sale terminals as well as online. In addition, these cards could be topped up with additional funds as needed during and after the crisis. That provision is a very, very good provision that should be shifted over to Bernie's bill, or to Bernie's plan, I should say. All cardholder and interchange fees associated with use of distributed cards would be waived for the duration of the coronavirus crisis. The cards, which are of course critical to the success of the program, would be distributed in three ways. First, by direct mail. All individuals with an active address on file with any government agency would have a card sent to them to that address via the USPS. In-person pickup. Individuals who do not have a permanent address or who otherwise cannot or do not receive their U.S. debit card by mail, including undocumented people, permanent residents, and temporary visitors whose stay exceeds 3 months, could also obtain one directly from any FDIC-insured bank or credit union, or temporary card distribution stations that would be placed at local post offices, and at embassies of the United States overseas. And then there's at-risk outreach as well. A dedicated emergency responder corps would perform outreach to at-risk populations, including people who are elderly, homeless, physically disabled, or live in remote areas, to ensure they receive their U.S. Debit card, and to simultaneously perform a general wellness check in case they need additional targeted assistance. Okay, and the Tlaib bill also includes within it how this would be funded. And the way it would be funded, according to that bill, is the Treasury Secretary would direct the U.S. Mint issue two $1 trillion platinum coins under the legal authority provided by 31 by USC Section 5112 K. I don't know if that's section or paragraph there, but I know that that is the text that provides the authority to the Treasury Secretary, which enables the Treasury Secretary to mint or to direct the mint to mint 1 ounce platinum coins whose face value can be specified at his or her discretion by the Treasury Secretary. There could be two 1 trillion platinum coins. There could be one $2 trillion platinum coin. There could be one $6 trillion platinum coin. When I look, at Bernie's program, it might just possibly amount to a $6 trillion boost of the economy, not just a $2 trillion boost of the economy. That's fine. We can mint a $6 trillion coin just as easily. And the funding mechanism is that Congress would direct the Federal Reserve to purchase the newly issued coins at full face value, but actually Congress doesn't even have to do that. But let's keep this in the bill to avoid any lawsuits, which would be ultimately doomed to fail anyway. But let's just have that in the bill. The Federal Reserve would complete the purchase by crediting the Mint's account at the Fed with $2 trillion in reserves. I'd say more like $6 trillion in reserves. The Fed would retain ownership over the two 1 trillion coins the $6 trillion coin permanently, in order to ensure its own balance sheet remains fully capitalized by the Treasury. Treasury Secretary would sweep the newly created reserve funds from the Mint's account into the regular Treasury general account. The Treasury would make the funds available to the Bureau of the Fiscal Service to disperse to every person in America in the form of the prepaid debit cards. And it says, in Rashida's bill, this approach would preserve the historical separation between fiscal and monetary policy and avoid financial entanglement between the Treasury and the Federal Reserve, which would eventually undermine the independence of the Fed. To me, that's BS. There isn't any independence of the Fed. At least there's no independence of the Fed from Congress, and really not much from the executive branch either. The only independence which exists now is due to the forbearance of Congress and the executive branch. And that can be abrogated at a moment's notice at any time. The independence of the Fed is not something guaranteed by the Constitution. Oops, my camera has gone south. Excuse me a moment while I fix that up. That was relatively easy. Hopefully it will stay where it is. So, okay, in the Rashida bill, it says in the long term, the card infrastructure should be converted into a permanent, Treasury administered, but digital public currency wallet system to serve as a privacy respecting e-cash complement to universal Fed accounts and or postal bank accounts for all. This proposal should be accompanied by progressive tax reform to ensure that the emergency relief provisioning does not exacerbate income or wealth inequality in the long term. That's a provision that could go into Bernie's bill, okay, as well. Now, this does not only have to happen through the minting, okay, of platinum coins. It can happen just as easily by Congress including, a very easy provision to pay for things. Specifically, let me share the screen again with something else. Let me see. Sorry, hang on for just a minute. And I will go there and get it, get what I need. I think you can see that fairly well. It says, upon passage of this appropriations bill, the Federal Reserve is directed to fill the Treasury spending account at the New York Federal Reserve with the addition to its reserve balance necessary to spend this appropriation. That's one sentence. And the second sentence is, in addition, the Federal Reserve is directed to fill the Treasury spending account with the addition to the Federal Reserve balance that's necessary to repay all outstanding debt instruments, including principal and interest, as they fall due for the fiscal year of this appropriation. Now, Congress is empowered, if it wants to do that, because the Constitution says that Congress um, has the ability to coin money, and that has been interpreted by the courts to include by creating currency in the narrow sense of currency, and also reserves, by creating reserves or additions to bank balances whenever it wants to do that. So if Congress included these two sentences in each of its appropriations bills, okay, or any other money bill, that would be perfectly constitutional to do. And the Treasury General Account, that is the Treasury Spending Account, would be filled at the point that congressional appropriations are voted, right after they pass the Congress and are signed by the President. The Fed would be mandated to place the necessary funds into the Treasury General Account, also colloquially called the Treasury Spending Account. So it doesn't have to be done by minting those coins. It can be done with direct orders from the Congress as well. So that's what Congress has to come back to do. That would provide much more of the relief that we need during this particular crisis, and would give people the feeling of security that they need to keep the economy going during this period of time. And to have that happen is absolutely essential. So, Congress must come back immediately. Congress must pass, and the President must sign. Bernie's program, supplemented by the provisions in Rashida Tlaib's bill. Let the House pass that bill. Let the Senate pass Bernie's program. Let the two go into conference committee to formulate the compromise that would synthesize both bills to produce the relief for the economy we need, and the time for people to stay home for as long as it takes to bend the curve and reduce the potential deaths that we are seeing from the coronavirus. We need to be free right now to concentrate on staying home and not going back to work. We need to flatten that curve. We need to supply our hospitals. We need to get the antivirals in place. We need to have more time to get the vaccine in place. And we can't have the economy and the businesses going away during this time through the combination of the Bernie bill and the Rashida Tlaib bill. We can avoid that. And by the way, we also need something else to happen. We need Joe Biden to drop out of the race. He is not the most electable candidate. He is the candidate who will guarantee the re-election of Donald Trump, as terrible as Donald Trump has been. Because people can see that Joe Biden will not offer the kind of relief from the coronavirus crisis and from the collapse of the economy that Bernie Sanders would offer now and would continue to offer as the President of the United States. The Democratic Party is morally and intellectually bankrupt. They have set Joe Biden up for the nomination, regardless of the possible hurt to this country that would result from that action. And why have they done that? Because the consultants and the party functionaries at the highest levels want to maintain their own deal flows and their own incomes. They need to get out of the way. They need to get out of the way and act in the country's interest. They're selling out this country every bit as much as Trump on his side has been selling out this country. Both sides have been selling out this country. They need to get out of the way and let the man who can cope with this crisis take the presidency and help us, empower us, enable us to do the work the country needs. So, I'd like to remind you, my Patreon account is at www.patreon.com/Joe_Firestone. I will now turn to your comments. I hope you've been sharing this widely, farly and widely, far and wide. So here we go. Let's see what you've had to say. Russ says, I can stay a little, but I'm pretty wiped. I hoped to help you feel unwiped, Russ. Kay says, hi, everybody. Rob says, hey, Yoda. Barbara says, not nearly enough. Kay says, hi, Dale. Evelina says, here. Hi. I'm here too, Evelina. And Barbara Wernick says, what will happen with the lack of urgency? Well, Hake says, with the lack of urgency, what we're going to get is a panic. And Tricia Broderick says, we should be getting monthly payments and Medicare for all and put all mortgages and rent on hold. Kay says, Bernie did a live stream this evening. He's the only one showing any leadership through this mess. I know he did a live stream. I saw the live stream. He again gave us his program through the live stream. And he talked about it in the live stream, and he did a good job. Barbara said, I saw that. We could be doomed. They are not getting the magnitude of what we are facing. Because they're not facing it. Because the people passing these laws are rich, and they're not facing what the rest of us are facing. At least they don't see it. They don't understand that if we can't stay at home and flatten the curve, and we have to go out, and we have to be involved in desperate activities to keep body and soul together, then whatever they do and however hard they try, the disease is going to spread to them too. And the Nancy Pelosi's of the world, roughly the same age that I am, can't afford to be out there. And they can't afford to have a public that is running around everywhere looking for something to eat while continuing to spread the virus. Rob says, I think the stimulus bill was an absolute atrocity. The bill was designed for the rich and powerful corporations to own everything down to the real estate. Yeah, I know, Rob. Trisha Broderick says, so let's do something. Well, what we've been doing here at this site is we've been calling our congresspeople steadily and telling them how terrible that stimulus bill was, that they have to do more, and we're telling them about the Clay bill, and now we're going to tell them about Bernie's program, and we're going to tell them that their activities thus far have been shamefully inadequate, like Herbert Hoover's were during the Depression of the 30s. And that if they continue with this, they're going to be going down in the fall. They're going to be going down because nobody's going to vote for them. I mean, they've made it so horrible for the rest of us that even the possibility of a third party being swept in will be possible, because both of these two establishment parties need to go into the trash can of history. They certainly do. Russ says, based on the graphs that I follow, I will not risk booking business until May 15th, and I may have to wait until June 1st. Yes, I think, Russ, that's absolutely true. I don't think you can risk booking business. I mean, you certainly would need to have N95 or 99 masks available to you. But to go into any homes to tune pianos, and you'd have to wear gloves and PPE equipment besides. Tricia says, this is necessary and exactly why this bill should be better. Tell people like you along with everyone else. This makes me scared to want to start my business, which is literally the American dream. So what is your business, Tricia? Russ says, my calendars are officially empty. Joe, what are your thoughts on the stimulus regarding people without health insurance but are hospitalized for COVID-19 will still be covered? Some say this is opening the door for socialized medicine. My thoughts, on the stimulus. The stimulus does nothing to privatize the hospitals. So it is not a socialized medicine. In socialized medicine, the hospitals are owned by the government. The doctors are paid by the government. If it's thoroughly socialized, the pharmaceutical industry would be taken over by the government. This is not about any of that. It's about paying the bills. It's about the government paying the bills of people who are not covered and saving their lives. And by the way, if they're going to do that for the people who are not covered, they should also pay the bills of the people who are covered, because the people who are covered have co-payments and deductibles and premiums. And during this crisis, they should be relieved of that burden as well. Oh, and also, by the way, I'm not one of those who worries about socialized medicine anyway. But just for the sake of accuracy, if the government doesn't own it, it ain't socialized medicine. That term is just a talking point and a distortion by the health insurance industry that doesn't want to see socialized health insurance. It's not socialized medicine. It's socialized health insurance that they're worried about. I'm not in the least bit worried about that because they've done a terrible job. And the job they've done has been causing the death on an annual basis, the unnecessary death of many thousands of Americans. I did some calculations on this myself. And since the passage of the Affordable Care Act through the end of the Obama administration, 356,000 fatalities had occurred that did not have to occur due to lack of insurance. And I wasn't even beginning to say anything about inadequate insurance. And there were many thousands who died due to that as well. Okay, Evelina says that would be a positive outcome. Hope you're right. My camera has gone unplugged again. Okay, back. So, Kay says Bank of America is one, if not the worst bank to try to deal with. I will never do business with them again after I had a mortgage with them and saw how they ripped me off over and over again to take care of the rich property owners. I'm sure. And Tricia said it can take up to September for some people. Yes, I read that today too. Tricia said don't count your eggs before they hatch. Barbara said there's no trust in our government to see us through. This, of course, it's Donald Trump's government. Who would be foolish enough to trust him? And Russ says sanctions. What a fucking idiot. Not just a fucking idiot, Russ. A fucking murderous idiot. Those sanctions have been murdering people. Lana says we need to lift all sanctions. It's true. Evelina says there's an echo. It's hard to follow. Sorry, Evelina. I didn't realize there was an echo. Let me see what I can do about it. Maybe I forgot to do something when I got on. Let me close some tabs here. No, there shouldn't be an echo, Evelina. Let me see. Maybe I lowered the volume a little bit. That might do it, but there's nothing on that could create an echo. Bonnie says she's not hearing an echo. So, is it just me? Yeah, it may have been just you. Okay, everybody, please tell me if my volume's okay now. Hard to follow. Steve says war actually increases production. And he mentions Rosie the Riveter and says this is the opposite. Evelina says, is just me laugh out loud? It may have been. Gab Santomart, are we entering a new phase for humanity? I hope this will lead to a new phase, which is a far better phase, but we can't tell yet. Steve says shared. Trisha Broderick leaves some hearts. Lana says I don't have an echo. Yes. Why are they vacationing in a pandemic? Oh, you mean the people on the cruise ship? Okay, and Lana says, I think that is what Bernie is proposing. You mean pay people to vacation so we can flatten the curve. Steve says, I really don't trust this government to help us at all, either party. I don't either. That's why we shouldn't trust them. We need to make them do it. We need to do whatever is necessary to make them do it. Barbara, oh, Congress vacationing. Yeah, they've been vacationing. Why are they vacationing during a pandemic? They're not vacationing. At least when they usually go home, they don't vacation. What they do is they try to fundraise more, and they try to communicate with constituents and take their pulse and find out if people are really, 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 really mad at them and might just end their careers in the fall. That's what they do. And with things so unsettled now, they're probably doing as much of that as they can, trying to reach out to people through virtual town halls. Tricia says, we need Bernie, and Steve Day says, Bernie needs us. And Lana says, has anyone shared this video to their own page? Steve says, yes. Steve Day says, to understand macroeconomics, let's talk about MMT. Up to us. Well, we'll be talking about MMT on Sunday with Jeff Epstein again. He wants me to talk about the Fed, so we'll be doing that on Monday at 9. Gab Santo Mark says, or maybe it's Gabe Santo Mark says, essential workers are risking their lives and deserve hazard pay. Death is almost guaranteed for people with pre-existing conditions. Well, not all pre-existing conditions. There are probably some that are not too much of a problem if you catch the coronavirus. And Evelina said, Gab Santo Mart would be nice if we evolved a bit. We're still so primitive, laugh out loud. L. Steve Day says, report price gouging to your district attorney. And Evelina says, Lana Dell, thank you, it's better now. It was probably because I turned my volume down, Evelina. Steve Day says, social safety net programs are not only compassion, but economic stabilizers, okay, as well. They are, and we really need to beef them up. Steve said, suspend permanently. Jim says, hey all. Kay says, hey Jim. Steve Day says, not accruals and back payments. Yes, no accruals and back payments. Absolutely right, Steve. The other Steve, Mr. Wolfbrand, said, these things ain't going to happen, Doc. We got to make them happen, Steve. We got to make loud noises. Every single day we got to make loud noises. We should go with masks. Go, everybody get those masks. Get the masks, get the gloves, and go stand outside the congressman's office. Evelina says, don't see why a special committee with few members of Congress is not convening right now when social distancing can be implemented. They don't even have to convene in person. I mean, a special committee could convene using Zoom, or probably not Zoom, because Zoom evidently has security problems. They would probably want to keep it fairly private, but maybe a free conference call would be good for them. Maybe they could use that. And Steve Wolfbrand says, Steve Day, capitalism, they want their money. Steve Day says, duh. Tricia Broderick says, people for the people. Sometimes I think the feds would cut off their nose to spite their face if need be. The president has no shame. It's an international embarrassment. It's an embarrassment for us because when all is said and done, he would never have gotten elected except we sat still for the nomination of Hillary Clinton. We sat still for that. We didn't create a third party over that. We should have. I've been seeing posts about the post offices could be closed by June. What the hell? Well, I don't think the post offices are going to be closed. Not in this crisis. Does anyone think the government is going to give us all that money? Oh, hell no. Depends on us, Steve. It depends on us. We got to go out there and fight for it. I mean, we got to point out to him. I think we got to point out to him, or to them, hey, it's a pretty nice system you have here. Okay, it's really doing great for you. Too bad if something happened to it. Steve Day, 1 trillion coins, and he gives the link. Sometimes I think the feds, oh, you'll also find the link in the description for this video. Evelina says, sometimes I think the feds would cut off their nose to spite their faces. It's an international embarrassment. The president feels no shame. Steve Day says, not without our understanding of macroeconomics that has been lied to us for 50 years. Steve Wolfbrand says, the worst part, there won't be any accounting for it. Hope people see it's time for a change and vote accordingly. Kay says, this mess in the economy has been coming for decades. All the GOP rule, and Clinton and Obama too, they all added to it. Stephen Day says, end trickle down and federal taxpayer stinginess, misunderstood, cruel, and unnecessary. Lana says, I agree. K. Rob says, as much as I love Bernie and as hard it is to admit he failed us, perhaps Chris Hedges was right. The left will be in the wilderness until we as a movement get our act together. I don't think he's quite failed us yet. I certainly think he didn't fight in the way that many of us thought was necessary. We believe that he should have been far more critical of Joe Biden continuously during the debates, and during the campaign. He should have made it perfectly clear that Joe was unfit for the presidency because of his record. He should have brought that record out plainly and aggressively in debate after debate. He should have done to Joe what Tulsi did to Kamala. He was perfectly capable of doing that. But he wouldn't do it. He didn't have the will to do it. And in that way, he did fail us because he owed it to us to do everything he could do to knock Biden out. Lana says, I think the fail was mostly preaching to his choir and not getting enough info out to the boomers who only watch the mainstream news. He hasn't failed us in a general way. He is still fighting for us every day. Yeah, that is right, Lana. And he still might win. I know about the probabilities. I know. The arithmetic is still there, though. He can still win. But he still has to finish the job. he has to knock out Joe Biden. I mean, of course, in a figurative way. He has to show to the country at large that Joe Biden is unfit, that he cannot beat Donald Trump, and even if by some miracle he did beat him, that he would not be able to handle the presidency in these times. I mean, both are obvious. Bernie has to communicate that to people. And as for the boomers, he has to be able to communicate to the boomers who are yet not too old to understand. They're in their 70s now. They're still not in their 80s yet. I know because I'm in my early 80s and I'm not yet a boomer. I think the boomers started in like 1942. 3 years ago, I still would have been in my 70s. So they're in their 70s. They can understand if you explain to them that Bernie's programs would be much better for them. Much better. Would save them a huge fortune. I did 2 or 3 live streams now on how much money they would save for myself and Barney. Okay. It's over $20,000 a year. It's a fantastic amount of money. No boomer who has retired and who is primarily living on Social Security at this time can afford to turn down a financial gain of $20,000 a year, which is what would come from Bernie's programs. They just don't understand how to make the case, which is probably because Bernie doesn't have any old boomers on his staff. He's got some really good people on his staff. But naturally, they never sat down to figure what it would mean financially to a boomer couple to have Bernie's whole program agenda enacted in the Congress. Why didn't they do that? Because his staff people are not boomer couples. They didn't have a personal interest in figuring out what it would mean to them dollar-wise. So they can't go into boomer developments and give speeches telling them what it would be worth to them financially if they could get Bernie into office. Instead, the other side gets in to talk to them about socialized medicine, okay, and other crap they wouldn't care a damn about if they knew that they as a couple would be getting more than $20,000 if Bernie came in and got everything he wanted. Kay says, exactly, Steve Day. I refuse to vote for Biden, and many millions of others will not either. Look for another 4 years of the dictator if they try to shove Biden down our throats. I'm all done with BNMW. Steve says, I'll never vote for Biden. Change it up. Vote Bernie no matter what. VBNMW. Kay says, if you don't vote for what policies you want, then you get the BS they decide for you. Steve says, yes, mint the coin sounds stupid. Not really. Not really. People can understand that actually pretty easily. Because they know about coins. They know coins are money. And they know the amount of money a coin is worth is what's on the face value. They know that. So minting the coin can be good. It can work. But it's even easier for Congress just to order the Fed to produce the reserves right after they appropriate the funds. I like it when it's easier. I like it when it's simpler. I like it when it's a fait accompli. So that's what I like about overt congressional financing. Okay. Evelina says it will be a long time at this rate, not enough people staying home. Steve Day says it, but the funding logic behind it, right on. Russ says, I'm still here. Gee. Enough people staying home? Don't think so. It will take longer to flatten the curve unless they lie to us. I've heard countless people all over my Facebook group saying they will go back to an independent party if the Democrats refuse to nominate Bernie. Steve Day says, fine, party doesn't matter at the general election. Russ says, I'm still here. Hey, Russ. Steve Day says, want Russ's biscuits? Stacy Van Veen says, there's been an uptick in robberies around here. I don't think here yet. Steve Day says, the Blue Party is shrinking quickly. They will pay. Steve Day says, I'm out after voting in my primary. Okay, in my state's primary. Kay says, I understand. Evelyn says, ran out of yummy things to eat, just home with the most essential to-dos. Won't starve, but will die from cravings. Gab Santomart says, I like this verse, quote, cursed is the one who trusts in man, who draws strength from mere flesh, and whose heart turns away from the Lord, unquote. Sadly, no human can ever be trusted because we're imperfect. Sole purpose to stay on top of the facts. Lena said, this will be worse than them just getting voted out. This mess is a risk for pitchforks and Madame La Guillotine. I am sorry to say. I'm afraid you're dreaming, Doc, if you think this government is going to help us. Well, they're not going to help us out of the goodness of their heart, Steve. I told you, we got to make them. Evelina says, just home with essentials. Ran out of all the yummy things. Steve Day says, get involved, Steve. Evelina says, won't starve, Lana, just die from cravings. Stacy says, I think in whatever bill is passed, there should be a provision that all SCOTUS proceedings are televised. Me too. I used to have a Facebook friend who worked for the National Health Service in the UK. She says the doctors are better under socialized medicine because they want you to stay healthy. Makes it cheaper for them. Kay says, I believe that. I worked in several kinds of healthcare when ours was not for profit. The change is scary to me. Yeah, people get taken in by the money. Jim Bird, you won't see anything until, like in 1929, people start to revolt. The establishment has to see their false prophets and mouthpieces, i.e. Cuomo, Biden, Trump, Pelosi, etc., are failing, and the people behind the curtain are exposed. They're seeing that now. Dale says, I have no echo here. And even says, no echo now, Dr. Joe. Kay says, no echo. Kay says, fine, Joe. Dale says, audio perfect, volumes. Single payer is the big change. Not all the skills, technology, and services. More added, actually. Russ says, volume and audio are good on my end. Jim says, we better do it now with our pocketbooks or we'll be throwing stones in the future. Steve Day and Steve Wolfbrand says, Steve Day, you obviously don't know me. If you have been more involved than me, I've knocked doors for Bernie in East LA. Unfortunately, Bernie has failed us, refusing to throw any punches. I agree with you there, Steve Wolfbrand. And Evelina says, we're mad, all right. L. Stephen Day says, thank you for Bernie. So you're giving up? No. No. We're going to keep trying to get Bernie to punch. Keep trying to get him to throw those punches. He owes us, Steve Day. He owes us. We supported him many times with scarce dollars. Steve Wolfbrand says, I'm assessing. Evelina says, how convenient for them. L. Steve Day says, and caps and gloves and gowns. And Kay says, where can you find the masks at? LOL, the homemade ones aren't good. Well, the homemade ones, some of the homemade ones, Kay, are better than nothing. Some are typically good. Okay, on YouTube, there's a doctor who introduced his wife who made some masks for him. And what she did was to use fabric, but to also use HEPA bags as well. And the small particles are not able to get through the HEPA bags. They are rated at 99.7% effectiveness in filtering out particles. So they have higher ratings than the N99 masks and higher ratings than the N95 masks. Okay, and the doctor who presented the video with his wife actually making one of these masks is an emergency room doc. Okay, and he said that mask works extremely well, and the couple was very credible. So you might want to find the video. It's been seen by quite a lot of people by now. Steve Day says, third party then, not now. Steve Day, what I feel Bernie's failings are not hitting Joe Biden, not fighting a Democratic establishment, not building relationships with other politicians, such as whom, Rob? I mean, I've seen people say this, not building relationships with other politicians. What other politicians? The other politicians all sold out to Joe Biden at the drop of a hat. What other politicians should he have relationships with? I mean, who are we talking here? He has relationships with Nina Turner. She's a politician. He has a relationship with the Soroters from Colorado. She's a politician, and he's a political consultant. He's in tight with Jayapal, but she's a politician. Who should he be building relationships with? He tried to build a relationship with Gillibrand. He let her in on the Medicare for All bill. She ended up endorsing Joe Biden. He had a relationship with Warren, he thought, for years and years and years. She sold him out twice. So this, relationship business, I'm not sure I credit that. I mean, most of the people you could name, strictly speaking, are simply sellouts. Maybe he should have cozied up to Julian Castro. he might have some potential to tell the mainstream to go to hell. Maybe he should have been more careful about continuing to cultivate Tulsi, even though she ran against him. Okay, I don't know what happened with Tulsi. I'm not in a position to say what happened there. Anyway, Steve Day says third party then, not now. And Rob says, after primary, I registered as I registered in the Progressive Party. Evelina says, not building relationships with other politicians. You want them to play golf? Haha. I agree with everything else you say, though. Yeah, want them to play golf. Yeah, Bernie couldn't afford to take him out to the restaurants they favor. Yeah, I'm kidding. Steve Day says PRG for real. I went back to MPP after a tiny weeny bit of GRN. Rob said, Evelina Pont, no, I'm not saying he needs to get chummy with them, but he still needs votes to get his policies passed. Well, actually, in the past, he's been pretty good at getting votes in concrete situations where he wants to pass amendments to bills. He was, after all, the amendment king, in the House. And he's done pretty well in the Senate also on some very controversial bills. As a legislator, he's actually very skilled. I'm sorry, folks. I'd like to go through all the comments, but you've got so many here tonight. I think I'm getting a bit tired. So, Carmen says, use breathable panty liner pads or carbon foam filter that go in air purifiers. They can be cut down to size. Huh. Yeah, Ro Khanna is one who is on Bernie's side. He is. He has alliances with young politicians. He doesn't have too many alliances with the old politicians. So why is that? It's because the old politicians, for the most part, have sold out. He's okay with Raul Grijalva, I'll bet. He's okay with Keith Ellison. Okay, folks, I think I'm going to say good night. Thank you very much for coming. And I will see you on Monday. On Monday, we're going to talk about the Federal Reserve, unless some kind of emergency happens. And there's just some need for to really get on here and rant and rave. So thank you very much for coming tonight. I enjoyed it. I hope you enjoy it too. And I'll see you Monday in the 9 o'clock hour. Thanks.